Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement in lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
Kathryn, welcome to Lawyers Who Learn. We, for better or for worse, have had a whole podcast before we started recording. So I'm excited to see what happens when we dive in on the air. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's really good to be here.
So you are the global director of, I had it written here and it's gone. Global director. What's your actual formal title, Bryan Cave? Global director of learning?
Global director of learning and development at BCLP. It's Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner.
Got it. You got to say the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I do the shortened one. Sorry. And you have such great energy just from the first 30 seconds, how you handled this. And I can imagine what that means for the attorneys that you've worked with your whole career, first starting at Sidley Austin. And I think you were at Akin Gump for a little bit in between and then back here. And you've always been in talent and development and learning. One of the things that you shared with me ahead of time was when you originally went to Sidley Austin, I think you might have actually been thinking potentially about actually being a lawyer. You started doing some exit interviews and something happened during those exit interviews that transformed the direction of your career. Could you get into that a little bit?
Yeah. It's funny when you first start out, you read into, I think, things that if you have a little bit more experience, you know not to read into. But I definitely thought I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to change the world and do all that fun stuff. And so I wanted to get experience first. And I had the privilege of joining Sidley. My title was legal personnel assistant, but I supported both the development of lawyers and the recruiting of lawyers. And as part of that, I sat in a room while someone with far more experience than me actually asked exit interview questions of our attorneys who were leaving. And I just scribbled furiously to take notes and then would type it up in a narrative. And so what happened is you would get these stories of people who were affirmatively deciding sometimes to leave law, to go to another firm, to go to government, to just do something else because they weren't happy there. And I didn't have a ton of experience to hear the other side of the story, right? I was just hearing all these horror stories. And I remember one of them said, now I think you can tell from me that I'm an extrovert. I like to talk to people, all that good stuff. And one of them said, I don't think I've talked to somebody except for you in the last 2 days. And I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't do this career. I thought, okay, I don't want to go to law school, but it is really amazing to be in the hallways for a big law firm. Like you are working with really smart people, intellectually curious, motivated, significant drive. To me, that's really inspiring. So I was thinking, okay, maybe I just build a career here on this side of the house instead of actually going to law school and going into big law. And that's what I ended up doing.
And just so I can understand, was this your first position out of college?
Yeah. I was just a baby. I was like 22 years old.
It was like an HR role.
HR role, supporting both the work allocation, onboarding, mentoring, training. And then there was a little bit of recruiting and events, on-campus recruiting, summer associate program, that kind of stuff.
It is what attracted you to this specific role is because you were working at a AmLaw 100 firm. So you're like, I'll get it.
Yeah. And I thought, and it was interesting when I had first interviewed with them, I was interviewing for both a paralegal position and this assistant, this like HR role. And I just liked the people more, quite honestly, this is where you make these decisions based on what you have in front of you. And then I thought, if I'm going to go to law school, like I get to see how the sausage was made, see what it is they look at in candidates, all that kind of stuff. So it could be quite helpful.
For sure. No, I love it.
I like the people. So I'm going to go there.
And also I went to law school, I think 4 or 5 years in between college, and I was actually working in sales the whole time. And I had a completely different perspective of those who I went straight through because I'd suffered in sales for 5 years and I knew the direction and what it was like. And I just felt a lot more mature and focused in my mind, at least, of what I was trying to do there.
Completely agree. So I ended up going back and getting my master's in conflict analysis and resolution. And I had time out and had work experience as a result, and actually went while I was working. And I think you can just pick out the people who have gone straight through. And in many cases, it's quite reasonable to go straight through. I'm not trying to be judgmental, but I think it gives you more of a complexity. And I think also a gratefulness for what you're learning in a way that I would not have had if I had went straight through from undergrad.
And mine was also like a little bit like maturity, immaturity thing. My dad grew up with nothing, and he ended up going to New York Law School on full scholarship, driving a taxi through there, and became a personal injury attorney. And for him, that defined his career and success. So all he ever wanted me to do was go to law school. And so for me, it was the last thing I wanted to do because I didn't want to be a personal injury. I didn't want to go back to school. And so it was like a reckoning when 5 years later, I actually became a real estate broker, and I had to study for the real estate exam. And I'm like, I actually like studying again. And that's what awakened. Okay. Also, I didn't want to be I saw these people who were similar to what you were saying, like the attorneys. I saw people 20 years my senior who were on their 10th sales job. And I'm like, I want a career for the next 20 plus years. So that was good. And just, sorry, I was running a retreat for the past couple of days, and I want to ask you about, I saw you had a partners retreat a couple of weeks ago. So my voice is still recovering, but
I have another week or two on you. So my voice is recovering.
Fantastic. And look, the photos on LinkedIn look amazing.
Thank you.
Just so I can get a sense, when you talk about starting this role, I think this is the name of the movie. It's called Up in the Air with George Clooney. And that's what I'm picturing. Was this like a whole thing of layoffs, or were these just random people who are like leaving and you just did exit interviews?
It was just random people who are leaving. What's ironic that you bring up that movie is that later on in my career, I became an HR business partner, and so much of what I did ended up being what we would call outplacements, so people who we know will not be successful long-term, whether based on performance or just your normal reduction in force because of market factors. I handled a lot of those redundancy conversations, and my friends would be like, I feel like you're in this movie. And I was like, I don't want to be in that movie.
And this is at Sidley you're talking about?
That was mainly at BCLP.
Okay.
That I handled the conversations. At Sidley, I was the person who came after to pick you back up and say, look, we're going to help you land somewhere that you want to be and will be successful at.
How much training? Because you also said you got your master's in conflict resolution, correct? Is that before that or after that?
Yeah. So I went back after 2 years in the workforce, so not as long as you did, but went back after 2 years, got that. And that was really a mix between psychology and international affairs. So looking at how people hold on to identities in times of conflict. And that could be intractable conflicts that you see on the nightly news. It could be, which is where I've used a lot of that education, in interpersonal relationships. People are dealing with change, are dealing with things that they're really uncomfortable with, and them hold on to things that are important to them in that moment. And so what that has given me is a lot of empathy for people in those situations, which I think you really need when you're having hard conversations.
And there's no question most people avoid difficult conversations. There's 2 books on it. One is Crucial Conversations. The other one escapes me right now. Did you ever read Crucial Conversations? Or
I have read through it. I cannot give you the outline.
I could tell you this. Right. And tell me if this is right. It's because it's one of the books that I've read. You don't want to, first of all, you have to have the trust. And if you wait until there's a big issue to have the conversation, it's too late. And it's about having small nudges along the way and building that trust throughout that time so you can actually be open and honest. But it's interesting because in the conversations you were having, the George Clooney movie, you didn't have necessarily a relationship. And did you get into the groove of it where like you knew exactly how they were going to react to what you said and you do that? What if I'm a lawyer listening or somebody who wants to get into learning and talent development at a firm, what could I learn from what you went through in those conversations? Or if I just want to talk to my wife better, right? And things like that.
What's interesting is that, so I have been on both sides of those conversations, all sides of them. So in an HR capacity, you are in a support role. So you gather all of the materials, you build the case in conjunction with the supervising partner, practice group leadership, department leadership, etc. And then that supervisor is typically the face of that conversation. So I have been on those calls, I've written the scripts, but they're the ones doing the bulk of the work in the moment. And I find myself being a very encouraging, supportive person for both the person giving the news and also the person receiving it, because it's equally challenging in both of those ways, in different ways, but equally challenging. I have then also had to have direct departure conversations with people who have worked for me, which I almost wish I had that experience before I was in that supporting role, because it shifted.
Yeah.
It made me realize how challenging it is to sit across the room from someone and say, I'm sorry, this is going to be a hard conversation. And then I've also had the experience of being laid off during the 08, 09 recession when I was at Aiken Gum, got caught in one of the rounds of redundancies there. So I've had lived experience of being on the other side.
Well, it's interesting because then I think that you ended up back at Sidley Austin after that. So that's
how I got back to Sidley. They found out I was in the market. They took me back.
Good thing, bad thing, who knows? Like that saying is, you think it's bad, but you never know until it happens. And then it's never over till it's over. It's so interesting because to your point, like those conversations, there's two things that we'll move past. Moving past this topic after this, but like I used to come from a very I perspective. Like, it's hard on me. This is tough for me, because it is tough on you, but they don't care how they're the ones getting fired, but it's so tough. That's what I think one person I had to do this with actually said to me afterwards, I know how tough this must've been for you, because we were close and they weren't performing. And I was like, oh, wow, Jesus. And then the second thing, unless it's like a layoff that is happening to a lot of people, they say, I learned it should never be a surprise to the person. Yeah. Like you probably had the fourth conversation up into that. So are those anything on top of those that you build on?
I could not agree more. I think so. What comes to mind is that when I did get laid off, and this shifted the way I looked at all of these conversations. My boss at the time had the conversation with me and spent what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, telling me how awful she felt about doing it, that it was market factors, which we knew at that time everybody was being laid off, and that this was not anything that I deserved, all this stuff, like really lovely words. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, how am I going to pay my bills? I was still quite junior, so it's not like I had a ton of savings saved up and anything like that. And so I remember finding my voice and just nicely cutting her off and saying, can you just explain to me what the benefits package, what the severance package is, so that I can plan?
Yes.
And she was like, oh yeah. And she jumped in, right? And so then taking away from that experience, when I did a bunch of coaching for people who are having the conversation, I said, you've got to put yourself in their shoes. They're going to survival, right? So you've got to tell them very explicitly what is going to happen, what does that look like, all of the compensation piece, last day, what the expectations are. And then you need to repeat that at the end, because their brain is like, the threat mode is just so high. And so being really thoughtful about that. Yeah. And then I remember the other thought I had is that I was going into having a conversation with somebody on my team, and my director at the time, who happened to be our chief operating officer, called me beforehand to just check in on me, which I thought was really lovely. Quite honestly, he didn't have to do it. And I said, I didn't sleep at all last night. Like, it was really hard. And he said, I think that says a lot about you. I
Yeah.
think it's good. And he said, and if you ever get to a point in your career where you do sleep the night before, you have to get out. Like you're not doing the right thing. And so those are the things that have really
I
stuck
love
with
that.
me.
No, I love that. And get to the point. Don't build it. Just tell them why they're there.
Yeah.
And then of course we'll move on from here. There's the legalese stuff. So like the worst thing you can do is like answer the question why, because you'll never give an answer that's acceptable. And then it just will be like digging. It's not the right fit or X, Y, and Z. You did. So let's talk. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say one last thing on that point.
Yeah, please.
I actually, when you talk about the legalese piece, I think it's all about how you make them feel in that moment. If people walk away feeling undervalued, unheard, they're going to be so much more likely to question it. From a risk management perspective, the more that you can be human in those conversations, obviously keeping in mind some clear guidelines that you don't want to move through. But I think if they feel like you have their back and this is just not the right place for them at this time, there's better things ahead of them. I think it's better for you, for the firm, for them. And it's a way to get away from this intense focus on like the risk piece of it. We work in a legal field. We're going to be concerned about risk. But sometimes I think we do ourselves a disservice because we're so buttoned up that actually it makes people feel like a cog in the wheel.
100%. Like I think Netflix has put the whole industry on the edge. What they started doing, I don't know, 20 years ago, where they're just like upfront conversations. We've outgrown you. You're not the right fit. Let's put that up. And people know that going into it. It's like a sports team. Like you open your locker and there's a red, whatever flag in there. And you're like, all right, I'm getting cut. Let's talk about what we both love. And that's learning and development and growth. Yeah. Let's talk about what you're doing in your current role. What are some of the really interesting things and programs that you guys have going on right now that my hope is that other firms can learn from what you guys are doing and you can learn from others. And that's what the podcast is about.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to do that. So you mentioned our partner conference. We just came off of a global partner conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, where we talked about a bunch of things, including call to action on business development for our partners, really leaning into this idea that it's not just the established partner in the corner office who has the really strong relationships, that it's incumbent on all of our partners to do their part to move our client relationships forward, make them deeper, expand them, et cetera. And in doing so, to work in teams to do that you're not on your own to do it. Talking about AI, on the innovation stuff that is both terrifying and quite exciting. But as part of all of that, we tied it back to the fact that our people are what allow us to lean into client engagements, to lean into the innovation landscape that is evolving every single day. And it's the strength of our people and the investment that we make in them that distinguishes us in perhaps a legal landscape that's harder to distinguish as time goes on. And so we did a real push on creating high performance culture at our firm that's rooted in our culture, which is kind, human focused, client centric, and really unpacking what that was.
I recently interviewed Caitlin Vaughn from Goodwin, and she talked about something really special that they do there for new associates. They actually take them off campus, off out of the office for 8 weeks. I think they're now shortening to 6 weeks. They do a whole, like literally they're just like learning at their own school about, they use so many different platforms and disciplines. I mentioned they use Hotshot, they use they use Type Coach, which is the personality platform I was telling you. And then they do a lot of internal training, and firms come, they do all these different simulations so the attorneys are up to speed. Are you doing anything with new associates similar to that to get them onboarded? And now I know Caitlin says they're now going to start doing that with partners and associates. I'm in the CLE world. I deal with pretty basic, easy to understand CLE courses. They're concrete. You can get the job done in an hour or two, but sometimes you need to dive deeper. So I would love anything you could share that you think would be interesting.
What's interesting about BCLP that I think distinguishes us across other firms is that so much of what we do is led internally by learning and development practitioners like myself. We have 3 former partners within our firm who are now coaches 100% of the time and using their practical experience to coach our next generation. And our partners, obviously, our partner faculty. So for some of our milestone programs, our legal milestone programs, we have a core faculty of 4 partners at varying levels of experience who create all the content, sit down with our associates and coach them through and teach them these skills. And to me, and so we see that at the first year level, we see it at the mid-level, we see it for our senior associates as they make their way into partnership, and then we see it certainly at the partnership level. And to me, I think that is an embodiment of our culture of investment in our people. And every firm's going to say that, but I swear to you, we are one of them. But really thinking about how we are investing in our people, and in doing so, picking the people that we think will do well here. There's a lot of firms, I'm going slightly off, but I think there are a lot of firms that it's a game of numbers at the beginning point. So some of the bigger firms are like this, right? Like you get reports of firms that are hiring like 200 summer associates, and then it's just a game of attrition, whereas we hire smaller.
Do you find that, so obviously we're past COVID, lockdowns and things like that, these coaching, the 3 or 4 partners who now are coaches and the 4 partners who are teaching, is this mostly in person or is it mostly through Zoom? Is it asynchronous? How do you find learning is best right now to get scale and to actually get to grow?
Yeah. So what's interesting is when I came into the global director role, we were doing a lot of both, probably more virtual than we were doing in person. But what was happening is you just weren't getting the uptake on the virtual sessions, right? Like they have it on one screen, they're working on another, and we weren't getting the interactivity, and it didn't feel like a good use of money, quite honestly. Now, in person is always going to be more expensive, but we see a real uptick in morale and collaboration and learning as a result of it. So what we have done is shifted our budget and our resources mainly to in-person programming. Now we have to be more strategic about when that hits during an associate's career. So it's not every year people get 3 or 4 in-person learning opportunities, but our first years come together in person, our mid-levels come together, and our partners come at various times. And then we have small feeder programs depending on your practice or your potential, quite honestly. So we have these legal milestone programs, trial, depositions, negotiations that hit depending on your practice. We have a global sponsorship program, which I think is amazing for our 20 high potential senior.
What does that mean, global sponsorship?
I'm glad you asked. So we identify high potential senior associates or counsel that apply. So we get, to give you a sense, we get 100 applications a year, give or take. We select 20 of those applicants, and then we pair them with a senior partner, so a full share partner with significant client relationships. Pair them over a year's time. They work with that sponsor on a client-facing project. So that's typically business development oriented. It could be capability mapping or something like that. We've seen practice areas born out of this program. And then at the end of the year, so they put that into place over the course of the year. They meet with clients, they do big events, and whatever it is their project is. And then at the end of the year, we bring them all together on a regional basis. So all the US proteges come together, all of our European, Middle East associates come together, and they present their project to our board and our leadership team and our practice group leaders. So there's a real stick at the end of this to help incentivize.
I love programs like that. Yeah,
But
no, I think
extraordinary what they achieve.
no, look, people like just, first of all, getting nominated and then getting it and then being part of it. All those things help build culture and energy. So that sounds awesome. If I could, I'm going to switch topics completely.
Yeah, let's
And
do it.
one of the things that you shared with me before we went on is something pretty vulnerable and close to you. And when I was asking you about like lessons that you've learned and opportunities that you want other and things that you would love for other people to learn from growth opportunities for you, is you talked about your daughter being born with birth defects. She's 6 years old now, I think, unhealthy. So
Very
just
healthy.
just so we know the ending, this when we go into the story, but she ended up in the NICU for, I don't know if it was 6 months or it was 4 months, a long period of time. And it's a very tough period of time for you. If you can take us through a little bit about like some of what that was like for you, but how that related to what you learned about your workplace, what you learned about yourself. I think I appreciate you opening up and sharing this.
Yeah, these are the moments that change you and ideally make you better. And I think this is one that made me better, a better parent, a better professional, better manager, all that kind of stuff. We were pregnant with our first child, a daughter named Evie. And at 28 weeks, we found out that there were some complications in my pregnancy. And so I started getting monitored on a weekly basis. And at that point, we thought it was a growth restriction, which I would never have said while I was actually pregnant going through it. But what you're monitoring is basically how far along she will grow inside versus when do you need to take her out for risk that she could be a stillbirth. Very stressful, made it to 36 weeks and they induced me, which was far longer than we anticipated that we would go. So at 28 weeks, they were like, you could give birth tomorrow. We don't know. And so for 2 months, we just hung in there and we were able to deliver her at 36 weeks. At that point, we thought she would be fine. The biggest challenge was actually the growth rate. But when she was born, we found out why we were having the growth restriction issue, which was that her esophagus never formed completely in utero. So that happens at 7 weeks gestation, and it's a fluke thing. So 50% of cases, it's that fluke thing, and then 50% of it is a larger genetic condition, which thankfully she does not have. We were just unlucky. And so I delivered at a very good hospital, but not what they call a level 4 hospital, which would have capabilities for the kind of condition she had. To give you a sense of the urgency of this, babies without an esophagus, actually, if they were to swallow anything, that goes into their lungs. Jesus. So she would have drowned if we tried to feed her. And up until the 1950s, there was not a very good outcome for these.
How did they know? Was it obvious when she was born? How did they know this?
Looking back at videos, we can now tell, but we didn't know at the time. But you can't really swallow. So what you do, you have a buildup of saliva and whatnot in your mouth. And so they were just using like a suction bulb to get it out. And I think they suspected in the birthing room. We knew she would have to go to the NICU anyway because she was quite small. She was 3 pounds, 14 ounces at birth because of the growth restriction. And they took her to the NICU. So we weren't caught off guard by that. That felt very normal. Not normal, but what was expected. And they then did an x-ray to confirm that she didn't have the x-ray, the esophagus. And then I won't go into this level of detail for all the 4 months, but I think this is crazy. So I'll share this piece. So they clean me up, they figure out what's going on with her, and they wheel me into the NICU. And they're clearly waiting for a neonatologist to tell us what's going on. And anyone who's been in a medical situation where they're about to tell you bad news, there's a feeling in the room. Yeah. You know something else is happening. And they wheeled me into the room and I'm holding her full of wires, all that stuff. And you could just feel it in the room. And I said, what's going on? And it's a nurse practitioner and a nurse, and it feels like they're not allowed to be the one to tell us this. And the neo is not at the hospital. He's on his way in. And the nurse practitioner says, do you have any history in your family of something like babies not being able to swallow or dying suddenly at birth. And I just remember whirling around in this wheelchair and looking at her and was like, is that where we're at? Is that, I'm looking at this baby and I'm like, and what I realized later through some therapy is that people don't know what to say in situations like that. She knew in the back of her head what the diagnosis was. She knew she wasn't able to share it with me. That needed to be a doctor to tell me. And so people say things to fill the space. And often when they do that, they say the things that make sense to them or feel good to them, and not necessarily with empathy or understanding of how that would be taken. And so I give her grace now, but it was a very traumatic thing to hear, especially knowing that this is not something, it's life threatening, but babies survive this on a very regular basis. Like, we were not looking at any concern there, but it is life threatening. So Neo comes in and tells us she needs to be transferred to a level 4 NICU. So we went to Fairfax Inova Hospital in Fairfax, Virginia, and they sent her on an ambulance ride over, told my husband not to follow because if they turn on the lights and go, you can't actually follow. And then, because there could be an accident because you're panicked. So we get to Fairfax Hospital. That condition requires surgery. You have to connect. So the esophagus grows from the top and the bottom and it meets in the middle. And it's very delicate, like it's paper thin. So it's quite an intensive surgery to do that. 3 pounds, 14 ounces. And I remember saying to them when they told me that there was a very real chance she would have surgery that day, I just remember saying, how do you do anesthesia on a baby that small? How do you get in there and do all this stuff? Thankfully, we were given a surgeon who did his residency at Boston Children's, which is the best hospital for this condition. And he had done more of these repairs than he had done appendectomies for children.
Wow.
Which I remember saying to him, like, that's not normal.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, it's not normal. And we had to fight for appendectomies because these were like candy. Like, we just got them all the time. And the first time I met him, so most surgeons, very busy, they come into your room very quickly, tell you whatever it is they want to tell you, and they walk away. And there were certainly surgeons that rotated that I was like chasing out the hall with questions. This surgeon, Dr. Nath, sat down with us, spent time getting to know us, gave me his cell phone number, and said, this is going to be a long haul. We're going to grow her before we do surgery. That's going to take some time to do, but it allows us to not have to open her up, like almost like akin to an open heart surgery. And we can do this laparoscopically. It'll be better for her in the long run, but we just need patience right now. So you call me, you text me if you need anything as we go through it. And he and I still text to this day, six years later.
Wow.
And I will often quote that story when I'm teaching our lawyers about client service, because there's a lot of things that I think are similar in the medical practice with as they are in legal, which is you are often supporting your clients or your patients in the hardest of times where there's really high stakes, and the level of relationship building and the trust that you can create between you and them is crucial, and you build it initially. And so I've always remembered that story. So long story short,
that was, first of all,
okay.
let's give yourself a pause there for a second. Wow. Have you, obviously that's a whole story. Have you been on a podcast before and shared that story in that way?
So I have not, actually. That's the first time I'm sharing it.
Wow. I really appreciate that. And it was such a beautiful way that you described and walked us through those moments. Just, I think anybody who listens to that will be able to get that. And also, like you said, take other lessons from it that you went there. So you were 4 months, right? And she had to grow and you had to build that up, and you were, I'm sure, there every day. Yeah. How did you deal with work and relationships at work and doing work, and then opening up to people at work about what's going on. What was that like? Can you take us through that a little bit?
So we had an extraordinary office managing partner in DC who had some really terrible things happen to her personally. She's lost two husbands, one to cancer, one to a heart attack unexpectedly. Her level of empathy and care is beyond. So when we knew that I was having significant troubles in pregnancy, I had shared that with her and felt so much support and investment from her. And we had worked together a lot before then, but not on anything personally. I wasn't sitting in her office
Sure.
just like shooting the breeze. And so actually, I remember when it took me a while to be discharged after Evie went to the new hospital. And I remember laying in the hospital bed and actually texted her that day to give the update. There was another partner at our firm who later became our office managing partner. And so I texted her, so it's LaDawn Nagel and Sue Kovarovic. So I texted both of them, gave them an update. And at that point, they were just extraordinary from a support perspective. To your point, I was at the hospital probably at least 16 hours a day, if not sometimes 18, 20. And I didn't worry about anything outside of being at the hospital with my daughter. So Sue created a meal train for us. And literally, like, people come out of the woodwork when things like this happen, which is extraordinary for just like our nature as human beings. And they would say, what can we do to help? And I was like, I'm Italian, feed me. Like, I like being fed. And so literally I would just send anybody to Sue. She was the head of our international trade practice. Like, she's extraordinarily talented, completely busy in her own right. And she was like, yeah, I'll do this meal train for you. Your husband wants to send you something, or your neighbor. Yeah, send them to me. And in the weeks that people didn't sign up for meals, like, she would come to the hospital and drop off home cooked meals for us herself. She's a very good cook. And we had at the time, we have a much more enhanced maternity leave package now, but at the time it was 7 weeks and Evie was in for 4 months. And at the time that my maternity leave was ending was also at some of the most challenging moments in her journey. So she had the surgery, she had a collapsed lung, she had pneumonia. It was not good. And I remember texting with LaDawn, and she said, what can we do? And I said, not even thinking really about maternity leave. And I just said, I just need time. I just need time with her. I can't leave.
Yeah.
And she went back and she figured out a way that I did not have to worry about work. I was paid the entire time. And so I didn't have to worry about bills. I didn't have to worry about food. We were there over Easter. They created this whole Easter basket for us with all the people in the office. It was extraordinary. And I felt cared for and valued.
20 minutes ago, you were telling me about the care that is there. And you're like, I know everybody says that, but it's true here. You just shared that story of proves that it's true in this instance. And you're in a role to now, and you've always been in a role to make sure that way you got treated, that everybody gets treated. And I think that's super inspiring to hear. There's one other thing you shared with me ahead of time that I think would really help give the full context of the story, is how when you were in the NICU and you had to essentially set goals to get out to get out of your comfort zone, to push you to where you wanted to get to. Can you tell us what that was, how that helped you? And then we can wrap up with a different topic there. But this has been such a impactful, and I really appreciate you sharing this for the first time here.
Yeah. So in the NICU and a lot of other hospital rooms, they put up like a whiteboard that has your goals, just for better communication between patients and the hospital system. And We had a lot of goals over the 4 months, but there was one goal that they wrote at the very beginning and it was there until the very end. And that goal was to grow strong. Getting a little emotional. And I would sit on the chair with her every day, holding her and look at the board, thinking about all the things that we had to tick off of that list to get home. I didn't have on my bingo card to cry in this. And it was at the very end that I thought, because people will say to you when you go through this, and they say it's stuff like this, but it's also other things that affect us in life. And they'll just say, gosh, you're so strong. You're so strong. And we didn't choose to go through that. I didn't choose to go through it because I'm strong. And I wasn't strong in the moment that it happened to us. And there were a lot of really hard, vulnerable moments in it. And I remember looking at that board and thinking, that's not just a goal for her. That's a goal for me too. And for my husband and our family to grow strong along with her. And at the end, we were strong. We were really strong by the end. But you've got to lean into it, and you've got to be really vulnerable, and you've got to learn as you go. So let me try and bring that back. I carry that with me beyond that room. There's a lot of really hard things that we have to do. We started out talking about up in the air and having hard conversations with people. I think all of that makes us better, but can be really scary. It can be challenging. We're out of our comfort zone when we do it, but it's so important. And once you do it once, you start feeling more comfortable and you start building some confidence. I remember having a doctor come in, one of the surgeons that wasn't our direct surgeon, and he was the opposite of our surgeon. He was very short with me, and I kept him in the room, challenged him, asked a bunch of questions, used the right medical language to make sure that he knew I knew what I was talking about. And when he left, the nurse said to me, like, oh my gosh, that was incredible. And I like burst into tears and I was like, oh my God, I learned how to do stuff like that. I didn't go in knowing that. And like I said, I take that with me in my day to day of what I do for a living and supporting all of our lawyers and our business services professionals. That if we can give them the ability to grow strong, they come out feeling really invested in and supported and better than they ever would have been without that support.
I will try to meet you so you're not alone in being vulnerable. And I might cry, so I'll say. But so one is everybody has something going on, right? And you don't know what it is. And so it's just recognizing there's a story behind just their 9 to 5. So one, we had twins who were born at 32 weeks and they were 4 pounds. So they were healthy, just really small. So they were in the NICU. We actually spent New Year's in the NICU. And to your point, like they took such good care of them and they were there. And what was the point when they were ready to leave, we're like, wait, we can take them home. You just don't like, you see them like all wired up and everything. You're like, I don't understand. We can just take them home and do this ourselves. So that was one area. The other areas was the part that's a little more challenging is like my mom over the past, she passed away last year, but over the past 16 years, she had cancer 3 different times every like 7 years. And the conversations, every time you were talking about that, like the intense conversations we had with different doctors and the different type of doctors. One of the things I learned, I don't know if you went through this process, I thought if I asked the right questions, I could solve it. And this is unfortunately ChatGPT thinks I just would out question them and do that. But we had some doctors who were short and to the point. I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to save your life. And then some who had the bedside manner. And so just hearing that, I know everybody who is grateful enough to be able to listen to this will be able to think back to their own hospital experience with their loved ones and what they went through and that lesson of what they bring with them afterwards. So thank you for doing that. I'll end on a note that I try to ask everybody because I'm compiling a list. Our 1-year anniversaries in a couple of weeks of starting this podcast. And we have compiled a list so far of, I think it's almost 200 books of recommendations that a book that's helped you in your career that you've recently read that's impactful. I see beautiful lines of books behind you. I see pictures of your daughter. Sometimes people open up their Kindle app and see what's on there. Is there any books that you would recommend for whether it's a lawyer or an individual just trying to grow in their career that would be helpful for them in their life?
Before I do that, I will just thank you for also sharing your story. And I'm sorry that you've had to go through both of those instances, but I do think you learned so much about yourself going through it. The strength that you
I'll say one thing to encourage you, and that's why I want to say it. I love talking about my mom. I love mentioning her. And also talking, obviously my kids, they're 16 now. And so but like that story, the more you can share it will help lead to other people wanting to share their stories. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. So I suspect the book that comes to mind has already been recommended. So I don't know if I'm going to add to the list. But to me, Radical Candor by Kim Scott was a huge aha moment for me. And it's something that I incorporate into a lot of our learning here, particularly for our leaders. But essentially,
Radical Candor, you said.
Radical Candor.
That was the other book. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, okay. There you go. We found it. So what we experience, and I think a lot of law firms do, particularly, maybe I'll generalize, maybe our Midwest firms, where so basically it's an axis, like a vertical axis of caring and a horizontal axis of challenge. And what I say at our firm is I'm not worried about the bottom piece of this graph where it's low care, because we care very much about our people. It comes through in our culture. It's how we retain people all the time. What we tend to do is high care, low challenge, because we think we're being nice, that we don't want to give these hard pieces of feedback, just holding a mirror up to people because we don't want to hurt their feelings. And what I said most recently at our partner conference to our partners is, imagine that someone knew something about you that would have prevented you from being in the room you are today, a BCLP partner conference. And maybe it was at your third year of practice, maybe it was your eighth, maybe it was even as a junior partner or a mid-level partner. And they purposely kept that away from you because it was too hard for them to have that conversation.
Yeah.
This ties in so much with what we were talking about in the beginning. And what I urge them to think about is that's inherently unkind. Like, we think we're being nice, it's inherently unkind. And so when people feel like you have their back, that you're invested in them, that high care, it allows you to challenge and to say, something's off. What's going on here? Let me get into this because I want the best for you. There's a bunch of research out there that's outside of Radical Candor about the single biggest indicator of resilience and success is relationship based. It's this feeling that somebody has your back. And so that high care is that piece, but you only really have someone's back if you're being honest with them. And you can do it in a caring, supportive way. But you think a doctor that comes in and this is the glaring issue that we have to solve, but it's going to hurt. So I'm just not going to do that. Like you would never go to that doctor.
100%. That's actually what I was talking about before when I was like, to build the trust. And you just said, you said it so much better than I tried to do it. And it's such an important component. I think she also did a famous talk. It wasn't a TED talk, but it was like a 20-minute talk that sort of sums that up. So I would recommend that. You said there was a book that you think other people recommended that you're not going to say, or is that the one you meant?
No, that's the one.
Okay.
No, I meant that I'm sure other people have said this, so I'm not.
It might have. I'm sure it's probably come up for sure, but not nobody's explained it in that way and getting into the details of how it works. So that I appreciate. With that, I think we've covered a lot in this episode and we've gone really deep, and I really look forward to continuing conversations with you above and beyond. Maybe in the real world we can meet. I'm in DC a lot. Maybe you're in New York, and then we can go from there. Kathryn, thank you so much for joining Lawyers Who Learn. And thank you, whoever's gotten this far and has learned a lot of different variety of things about people, life, and talent development at Big Law. So thanks again.
Thank you. I've loved it.
Loved it too.